Hi, my name is Dr. Barney Walker. You can call me Barney, and I'm the admissions tutor in philosophy and also a teaching fellow in philosophy at Warwick University. So as part of this job, I do a certain amount of outreach work in schools and colleges, and that's what I'm going to be doing for you today as part of this Channel Talent headliner session. So the title of my talk is Democracy and Deepfakes. So what I want to do is introduce some recent philosophical work to you on the subject of deepfakes, which is this new technology which enables very realistic fake recordings to be created. And what we're going to think about, and what I'm excited to hear from you about, are the implications of this technology for democracy and the processes of sharing information and engaging in debate on which democracy relies. I want to begin in a slightly different place by just showing you three photographs. So here we go. Here's the first one. Now, as you look at these photographs, I want you to see if you can spot anything odd about them. So here's the first. Here is the second. And here is the third. So I think you may have been able to guess what's funny about these photographs. All of these photographs are fake. These are doctored images of events which either didn't happen at all or which at least weren't photographed by anybody. So this fake photograph, shows an image of Albert Einstein on a bicycle superimposed over an image of an atomic bomb exploding in the background. This fake photograph interestingly purports to depict a real event. So this is the Campanile in St. Mark's Square in Venice, which collapsed in 1902. So nobody photographed this event, but at the time it occurred, fake photographs purporting to show the collapse of the tower were circulated. I think you can see that this is really quite a crude fake. And then finally, this is one of the famous Cottingley fairy images, I think produced in the 1910s, or maybe it was the early 1920s, which purported to show fairies. What's interesting about these, I'll just mention, is that although the fake is really quite crude, so these images of fairies were just created by drawing on paper cutouts, they nevertheless fooled many people, including Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes. So fake images, doctored photographs, really aren't anything new. People have been making them for various reasons for over 100 years. But in recent years, a new form of doctored or faked footage has appeared, which is known as a deepfake. So deepfakes, and I'm guessing some of you will have seen some already, are much more sophisticated than the sorts of fake photographs we've just been looked at. And here's how they work. So a deepfake is a fabricated audio or video recording created using machine learning. So what you do is you have an algorithm, a computer algorithm, and you feed into that algorithm hundreds of hours of recordings of a celebrity. And this algorithm then builds an adaptable model of the face of that celebrity, which can be digitally inserted over the face of another person in a different recording. So actually the image that you can see above me right now comes from a deep faked video of Barack Obama. So it's actually someone else, an impressionist, but Barack Obama's face has been inserted over the face of this impressionist. Using this technology, you can make the celebrity, be it a politician, an actor, a sports person, you can make them say anything at all that you like. And you can easily imagine that this could have very dangerous or comic or humiliating consequences for that individual, or indeed for society more widely. Interestingly, this is something that you could even do technically in real time. So you could have somebody being interviewed via video link from a TV studio, where the person externally isn't the person that the TV studio thinks is being interviewed, but is really somebody else who is deep faking in real time, who has a patch of someone else's face being inserted over theirs, and that's the image that's being fed back to the TV studio and the wider audience. So deepfakes are a fairly recent piece of technology. I think they appeared around 2016, 2017. The name actually comes from the Reddit handle of a Reddit user who created an app, fake app, which enables people to make deepfake videos easily at home. The main use of deepfake technology so far has not been political, but has rather been pornographic. So people use these apps to insert the faces of celebrities into pornographic films, and that is the dominant use of the technology so far. But clearly it has much wider uses than that. If you've not seen a deepfake video before, I really suggest at this point that you perhaps pause this lecture and go to YouTube or click on the link below the video to see a deepfake video of Tom Cruise produced by the actor and impressionist Chris Oom, and that will give you a sense of how impressive and convincing this technology can be. The video of Chris Oom impersonating Tom Cruise is really rather uncanny. And in current events, deepfakes are already being used. So part of the Russian strategy in Ukraine, and the war there is still ongoing as I record this lecture, has involved making deepfake recordings of President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, as the Mirror puts it here, bashing Ukrainian cities. So slagging off basically these cities or their inhabitants as a way of trying to undermine the morale of the Ukrainian people. So this technology has a clear political, military, strategic use. So the technology is fascinating, captivating, and also worrying. And I think it's worrying in relation to democracy. So a very basic feature of democratic systems in politics, systems where people vote to elect their own representatives, or perhaps take decisions directly themselves by popular vote, as in, say, the Brexit referendum, is that these processes are reliant on the availability of good information. If a population is not well informed, or if it's been deceived, then it is unlikely to make wise political decisions. And so this means that any technology which can potentially disrupt the spread and dissemination of reliable information is dangerous to democracy and can be used to undermine it. So the question that I want to explore in this lecture, having now introduced what deepfakes are, is whether deepfakes pose a new and significant threat to democracy. Is this technology something which we should really worry about as citizens of democratic nations? And this is actually, I think, an aspect of a wider discussion and debate that's currently going on in philosophy and politics. So it's often suggested that we are living in a post-truth era. So post-truth is a new word. It was actually Oxford Dictionary's word of the year in 2016, which was the year of the Brexit referendum and the election of Donald Trump. So the way Oxford Dictionaries defines it is to say that post-truth relates to or denotes circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. So you can see how in Undermining trusted information in video recordings, deepfakes might contribute towards a post-truth era in politics. Although I must say that to my mind, it's worth thinking about whether we've ever lived in a truth era of politics, given the importance that propaganda, rhetoric and appeals to emotion have always had in politics. But anyway, at the very least, one might think that we're in a particularly precarious time when it comes to the authority of truth in the political arena. So, in considering this question of whether deepfakes pose a new and significant threat to democracy, I want to do so by looking at the views of the philosopher here, a philosopher called Regina Rini, who works at the University of York. So Rini has recently published an article, Deepfakes and the Epistemic Backstop, in which she argues that deepfakes pose a new and serious threat to our collective democratic processes of information sharing and debate. So she thinks that deepfakes really are a game changer when it comes to the sharing of information in democratic societies, and they pose a serious threat, therefore, to democracy. So what I want to do in the rest of the lecture is to outline Rini's reason for thinking this, and then to offer some discussion of that as a way of getting you thinking about the issues here. So the particular reason that Rini gives for this claim is that deepfakes threaten to undermine what she calls the epistemic backstop provided by video recordings. So I'll get on to explaining what she means by that in a moment. But to begin with, I want to just think about a much more general issue about trusting sources of information. And this will lead us into thinking about the epistemic backstop, as Rini calls it, that recordings provide for our collective democratic processes of information sharing and debate. So let's start with this very general question. Why believe what anyone tells you? Why should we ever trust what someone says? So the image on the slide shows somebody testifying in a court. And you might think that in court there are sort of special reasons why people are likely to tell the truth, because in court there is specifically a charge of perjury which can be brought against you if you are caught lying. And that can lead to further criminal proceedings and punishment being taken against you. But of course, most of what we say isn't said in court, and there aren't these formal mechanisms of punishment available. So why should we trust what people tell us? Why ever believe what somebody says to you, given that it's possible for them to lie or to be misinformed? So Rini, in her article, which incidentally I should say you can read, it's open access and it's linked on the Channel Talent page where this lecture is, although don't worry, you don't have to read the article before the live session, but it's just there in case you want to have a look. So in her article, Rini says that at least part of the answer to this question of why you should believe what people tell you is that there are these things which she calls testimonial norms. So these are roughly rules which we all recognise and informally apply when we are assessing what other people tell us. So the examples of these rules are actually very straightforward and should seem familiar. So they're rules like don't lie. You shouldn't say things which you know or believe to be false. And don't say what you don't know. If you don't know that it's true that, I don't know, Tom took the money from the drawer, then you shouldn't say that Tom did that because you don't know that. So we have these informal rules that we recognise and apply to one another when we're assessing what we say. And importantly, if you're caught breaking these rules, that has consequences for you. If you are caught lying, then people will disapprove of you. Perhaps they will no longer want to see you at all or speak to you at all, or more minimally, they might just say, I'm not going to trust this person anymore. I'm not going to believe what they tell me. Or similarly, if you go around saying a lot of things which you don't really know to be true, perhaps you're a gossip, as many people were in the village where I grew up, you become known for being unreliable, a bit foolish. And again, people don't take what you say very seriously, and perhaps they will sometimes even criticize you directly for saying things which you really don't know to be the case. So even though we don't have these formal rules like we do in a court, which operate all of the time when it comes to what we say, we do have these informal rules which we informally enforce in our social relations with other people. And importantly, the existence of these rules gives all of us a reason to obey them. Even if we don't want to, even if it's perhaps not particularly convenient for us to tell the truth on a certain occasion, or even if it would be very convenient for us to say that something was true even though we don't know it's true, the fact that we are aware that we can face these sorts of informal sanctions for breaking testimonial norms still gives us a reason to speak the truth or not to say what we don't know, because we want to avoid becoming known as liars or fools. So that's the idea of a testimonial norm. So Reenie's idea when it comes to recordings is that recordings provide a backstop for testimonial norms in two ways. So the metaphor of a backstop here is the idea of something that's placed at the rear of something else as a barrier or a support. So Reenie's idea is that video recordings create a kind of support or backup for these testimonial norms, things like don't lie, say only what you know, which we apply to one another in telling each other things. And she suggests that there are two different ways in which video recordings provide a backstop for these testimonial norms. So firstly, they do so through what she calls active correction. Video recordings enable us to catch past violations of testimonial norms. So if somebody lies about something, but then a recording subsequently emerges, that enables us to catch out the person in their lie and then apply whatever sanctions that we think are appropriate to them for lying. But video recordings also support or back up testimonial norms via what Reenie calls passive regulation. So the thought here is that, look, speakers are aware as they say things that they, in saying those things, may be being recorded, or that the things they're speaking about may have been recorded. And this means that they're aware that there's a heightened chance of them being caught out in violations of testimonial norms. So if there's a recording of them, then it's there on the record and people can go back and look at what they said later and check it against the facts. Or if the thing that they're speaking about has been recorded, or may have been recorded at least, what they say can be checked against the recordings of those events. And so knowing that in these ways the risk of being caught violating testimonial norms has been increased, speakers have an added incentive, an added reason to try to obey the testimonial norms as best they can. So recordings in these two different ways back up these testimonial norms, which provide at least part of our basis for believing what others say to us. So let me just illustrate this idea of active correction with an example which Reenie discusses in her paper. So here in this photograph, you can see Junichi Fukuda, who was a senior minister in the Japanese finance ministry. Now, Fukuda was accused by a reporter of sexually harassing her during an interview. Fukuda denied the allegation, but it then emerged that the reporter had recorded the interview on her mobile phone and had audio evidence of the harassment taking place. Now, at this point, Fukuda continued to deny the allegation. He said that the person in the audio recording did sound like him, but he claimed that he couldn't tell whether it really was him because he could only hear his own voice through his own body, and so he couldn't tell if the man in the recording was him or not. Fortunately, in this case, the Japanese public was not convinced by Fukuda's rather lame denials, and he was forced to resign from his position. So here's a case clearly where an audio recording is used to expose somebody in a lie. And so we have an example of what Rini calls active correction. But as I said, testimonial norms are also supported via video recordings through what Rini calls passive regulation. So here's a quotation from her paper where she just explains this idea in a bit more detail. So she writes, "Part of the reason our ordinary testimonial practice, our ordinary practice of telling one another things, allows us to trust one another to be sincere and competent is that we all know that at any time we might be within the range of an audio or video recorder, or might be testifying about an event that occurred near such a device. This is especially true for public figures, who can expect to acquire the interest of smartphone-equipped observers in every room they enter. Your background awareness that the event you are testifying about might have been recorded is a good reason to be as sincere or honest and competent as possible." So Rini thinks that in these ways, video and audio recordings play a very important role in grounding the norms, the testimonial norms, don't lie, only say what you know, whose existence is an essential part of the basis of what enables us to trust one another. And so it's within this context that we can see deepfakes as something that's really threatening. So in her paper, Rini talks about backstop crises, and she thinks that deepfakes will inaugurate an era of backstop crises for video and audio recordings. So she thinks that the main problem with deepfakes isn't that people will be fooled by them. I mean, of course, sometimes people will be fooled by them, but the main problem, she thinks, is not that occasionally people will be fooled by them, but rather that people will stop trusting video and audio recordings because they will be aware that deepfakes are out there, and that for many, if not any of the recordings that they look at, it's possible that the recording that they are looking at is a deepfake rather than the genuine article. And this means that recordings will cease to function as an epistemic backstop. They will cease to function as something that we can use to catch people out in violations of testimonial norms, in lying or in saying things that they don't know to be true, because whenever an inconvenient recording appears, Rini suggests, politicians will just be able to say, well, that's not real. If we're thinking about the political case, that recording isn't a real recording, it's a deepfake. I didn't really say those things. Or that recording of those events which I spoke about, that recording isn't real, it's been deepfaked. And so recordings will cease to function as a way that we can catch people out in violating testimonial norms, and they will also weaken as a form of passive regulation, because people know that if they are caught violating norms, they'll always have the get out of crying deepfake. So, as I've put here, recordings will cease to function as a backstop for our testimonial norms, weakening their regulation of public information and debate. So that Rini thinks is the threat that deepfakes pose. And of course, one likely outcome of this is that rather than basing their beliefs on evidence, as perhaps they ought to, with any possible piece of evidence, something that could potentially be deepfaked, people will just base their beliefs and political decisions on their pre-existing biases or on their pre-existing position. They'll bunker down, increasing the division in society and increasing the extent to which people's political beliefs and decisions are shaped by non-truth-based factors. So it increases this post-truth malaise into which politics has fallen. And that's the real worry that Rini has about deepfakes. So that all sounds kind of depressing, but we should really think now about whether Rini is right. Is Rini right that deepfakes are a game changer, which is going to undermine the capacity of recordings to provide a backstop for testimonial norms of the kind we've been discussing? So I want to just briefly consider two objections, and I hope this is going to form the starting point for a larger discussion that we're going to have in the live session. So the first kind of objection that you might make here is a sort of technical objection. You might say, look, deepfakes just generally aren't really good enough to fool people. You can kind of tell that they often look a little bit funny around the mouth or around the eyes. And even if deepfakes get better, we will have the software to detect them. We will be able, through analysis of the footage using computers, to determine that a recording is a deepfake. So this is really just a technical problem that admits of a technical solution. So Rini makes a number of points in response to this technical objection to her argument. So the first point she makes is that deepfake technology is improving all of the time. And if you want to see what this technology is capable of, you shouldn't be looking at the sort of amateur productions made by people on Reddit. You should be looking at what computer scientists and more skilled producers are able to do with deepfaking technology. Again, I refer you to that deepfake video of Tom Cruise made by Chris Oom, which is highly realistic. She also points out that it's not clear that detection software will be able to keep up with the technology that deepfakers can use to conceal the fact that a recording has been deepfaked. So there's a kind of arms race going on at the moment where people are trying to develop software to detect deepfakes, but at the same time, people who are making deepfakes are trying to find ways to get around detection via that software. And we can't just assume that this is an arms race that the detection software is going to win. And finally, she points out that even if we do develop means by which we can reliably tell that a video has been deepfaked, past experience with fake news suggests that corrections rarely travel as far as initial fakes and are often not as readily believed. So even if it is possible after a deepfake video has been released for us to authoritatively say, actually, that wasn't real, by then it might be too late, or kind of denials are so much less interesting than this kind of extraordinary footage that has been out there, that it's not clear that we've got sort of sufficient power at that time to play catch up and reverse the effects that the deepfake has had. So Rini is really quite skeptical of the idea that we can solve the problem of deepfakes merely through technology. So that's the technical objection. The other objection I wanted to consider, and I'm not going to offer a reply to this objection, but I think this is something I want you to think about, is this objection that, look, fake images are really nothing new. They've been around, as I began by emphasising, for over 100 years. And here again, we see the fake photo of the Campanile collapsing in St Mark's Square in 1902. So you might say, look, fake photographs have been around for over 100 years, but we can still trust photographic evidence. Why should deepfakes be any different? Why should the fact that we can now deepfake recordings of people fundamentally undermine the trust that we can place in recordings? After all, most of the time you might think we still have good reasons to trust the photographs that we see printed in the newspapers, even though it's been possible to fake photographs for over 100 years. And indeed, more generally, this is just an aspect of the whole issue of trust. Look, people have been lying to each other since the dawn of time, but that hasn't stopped us from being able to sometimes trust one another, and therefore to be able to use language to convey information to one another. So we all recognise that through any source that we use to convey information to one another, be it language, be it photographs, be it video, there are opportunities for people to deceive us through faking footage, through telling lies, through doctoring photographs. And yet much of the time, you might at least think, we are still warranted in accepting what others tell us, in taking photographs to be genuine, and perhaps even with deepfakes in existence, in believing what video recordings seem to reveal to us. So why are deepfakes any different? Why are they a game changer, given that other forms of deception have been around for a very long time, and yet we've still, it seems, been able to get along more or less fine? So that's the other objection that I want you to think about. So let me finish just by listing a few questions, which will hopefully give you food for thought in the lead up to the live session. So the first question is just, do you agree with Rini that deepfakes pose a new and serious threat to our collective democratic processes of information sharing and debate? Do you agree with her central claim, and do you agree with her reason for that claim, that deepfakes undermine the role of recordings as a backstop for testimonial norms? Can we still trust photographs as evidence despite the ease of faking them? If so, why? And this feeds into the objection that I've just been explaining. Is there anything distinctively different about deepfakes? So Rini thinks that there is, but it's worth thinking about this parallel with photographs and to see, well, is there really anything different here? And finally, if we can still trust photographs despite the ease of faking them, can we still trust recordings despite the ease of deep faking them? So those are some questions to think about. Really looking forward to discussing all of this with you further in the follow-up tutorial. Look forward to seeing you there. Bye.